pretty obvious. I want to basically come up here and speak about pop-up cities, and specifically why I think leaning into that format could actually be the best, or at least one of the fastest ways to get startup societies in front of 1 million plus people. And I want to do that through the lens of a project that I'm involved with called Metacamp, which started as a pop-up and is now actively purchasing real estate in Costa Rica. So the question that I want to put in front of everyone is just this. The interesting things that I noticed coming into startup societies as sort of a thought space, as a community, as an experimental space, is that a lot of the people came here because of push factors. What I mean by that is they were disaffected by something about the way current society was running, right? In the case of Italia, it might be like, why is the FDA taking an average of 10 years to approve new drugs? For other people, it's things like, why is it that when I go to the polls, it seems like I have a lose-lose option to choose from, right? Or what are we going to do about mounting national debt? These kinds of push factors. And what I want to propose is that actually pop-up cities are a really different way to put forward a message about startup societies, because they're full of natural, really good pull factors. So for a start, they have high virality. People love sharing where they are, who they're with, what they're doing. That's like, 50% at least of my social media feeds. They're also sticky, right? In the sense that lived experience is much more discussed, and it's much more compelling when it comes from someone you know, right? So when you have a real world experience, if you come to Vitalia, you meet a bunch of great people, you go home and talk about it, that is more trustworthy of a source of information and makes it more likely that people you talk to will actually want to come and experience a startup society or pop-up city for themselves than any type of reputable article or other news source ever could. And then finally, they have a really low barrier to entry, right? It's just much easier, especially given the world's like booming nomad population, for someone to decide, yeah, I'm going to go for maybe even a summit, right? Dip my toe in the water 3 days. Maybe I'm going to go for a month, 2 months, and really on-ramp their engagement with the space in this contained, controlled way. By comparison, I think it's actually much, much harder to say, something like, we want to build a free state, and we're going to ask you to uproot your lives, your jobs, your families, and move to somewhere new, right? With people that you don't really have maybe any social pre-engagements with. So, what do I mean, at least, or what we mean by startup society? So, can't really take credit for this graphic. This is actually a borrow from something that Vitalik showed at the first Gazalo in Montenegro. But when you put the x-axis of time along with the y-axis of number of people, you start to see that we've had these analogs for, most people know what an offsite is, they know what co-living is, a conference. They can kind of even just actually imagine it, more than just intellectually. They can kind of be like, kind of guess at the sort of people who might be there, what they might be doing most of the day. And I think that now we're in this space where we're actually starting to see the population, which is you and me and everyone here, of people who understand kind of what maybe to expect at a pop-up village, right? At a place of 1 month with about 50 or so people. Kind of maybe getting to the sense of what to expect at a pop-up city, right? You go to 2 or 3, you get a sense of it. And I think that there's also, interestingly enough, this idea of role expansion. So as you go up on this orange line, you move from a kind of consumer mindset, right? Where like if you go to an offsite or conference, basically someone planned this experience for you, and you basically just sit there and consume it. And then you actually, at the pop-up city, like now, most of the events, I think, that I've attended have been co-created, have been created by other builders like myself. And then if you go up even further, I think that actually the role of a citizen is actually, or like the one that we're conceiving of, this kind of citizen netizen, is even more expansive. You participate in the market forces that actually help to shape your experience. And I think that that's something interesting to look at. Another thing as well is that when we look at the number of people on this axis here, I'm not necessarily implying that they're all living in the same spot. I think it makes perfect sense to say that a pop-up city could be taking place in 2 different neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods might be separated by a road or by an ocean. And that nodes, of course, in a new city or a network society might indeed be all over the world. Okay, so this is the question, I think, that pop-up cities really get the most, which is, does this really happen? Like, do pop-ups really become permanent cities or nodes in a network society? Or are they just like retreats playing dress up as cities? And I think I have 3 things to say about this. The first one is just that I don't think every pop-up needs to become a permanent city or a network node. I think it's just in the same way that every startup doesn't need to become a unicorn for the idea of startups to be emboldened by the existence of unicorns, right? For the idea to catch on. And the second thing is I think that pop-ups actually provide really valuable resources to other startup city projects, right? So they're a source of revenue for landowners and a source of potential new residents for ones like Prospera. And the third thing is that some pop-ups will go on to become permanent. And by doing so, they create playbooks that other communities can then follow. Okay, so the story of Metacampus begins with Metacartel. And I'll explain, there's a lot of meta that's going to get used, so I'll walk it through it. Okay. So Metacartel is a DAO, an Ethereum community that turned into a grant-giving organization very quickly. So accumulated 137 members over 4 years with a sort of minimum investment buy-in of 10 ETH per member. And so to date, it's given out more than $1.5 million in no strings attached community grants for all kinds of projects, right? Like art projects, educational ones, events, all kinds of things like that, as well as more traditional like investments in projects launching tokens. Okay, so when you have such a big community, you obviously, Ethereum community especially is very, very mobile and active. And they run more than 50 events around the world. And in particular, interestingly, tried different formats. So there was MCon 1, which is 350 people, MCon 2, about 800 people, both of those, I think, in the US. And then last year, there was a festival, MetaFest Croatia, which took place actually right after Zuzali Montenegro finished. Right. One of these events is Metacamp, right? So now we're going all the way down from a series of events just to this one format, which was I think about 10-day gathering in Costa Rica. Some people arrived early, some people extended and stayed late. Let's call it about 10 days, which started off being once per year, and then it grew to 2 times per year. And always coming back, interestingly, to the same spot. So they were building habits, right? People not only knew the people they were about to see, they also kind of knew, like, I'm excited to go back and go to this particular beach. I'm excited to eat this dish at this place. And so that's kind of birthed this natural question, I think, for people, which is, what if you didn't have to leave Metacamp, right? And it's, I think, the same thing that's happening here with some people at Vitalia. Well, what if I just don't leave, right? What if we just collectively rent here, form a community here, and put down a little bit of roots? So it birthed Metacampus, which is obviously just an extension of Metacamp as the name, which is a crowd-funded multi-use property. And this is a map of Costa Rica, and it's up here around in the Guanacaste region. And also explicitly intended to be a future node in a network society, right? Not starting by identifying what that network is, but knowing that if we're all rowing in the same direction, there will be a network that we can hook into. And actually, this picture before appeared in John Hillis's Cabin's presentation, because in fact that was also partly sponsored by Cabin, right? So you can start to see that these things are actually linking up and crossing over. So what made it possible to go from a pop-up to a property? I think that actually, interestingly, when you choose a location for a pop-up, you're actually already choosing something that could have good potential to turn into a property. Why? Well, there's lifestyle factors. So in this case, Nicoya Peninsula is actually a longevity blue zone, which might be of interest to people here. It's also got great beaches, right? It's just a very idealistic sort of tropical existence. There's proximity and familiarity. By bringing it back to the same place every year, they were building habits, proving out that they chose a place with good flight paths. There's regulatory factors, zoning and visas. Those things you're going to be choosing for anyway, at least a visa access usually when you do a pop-up, if you're anticipating a global community is going to come. And then the last two, those ones are a little bit less tied to what you might already organically be choosing, right? But if you have an idea that you want to do a pop-up and eventually you may want to turn that into a property, these are things that you consider as well, construction and also economics. So where is this project at? Well, there are 3 phases. First one, we're basically at the tail end of phase 1, which is securing the land. So there's 5 lots next to each other, 12 acres in total. We've bought the stuff in green. The stuff in pink is being surveyed by a local company for all of the things that you should look for in a rural undeveloped piece of land. So, what is the seasonal changes? What is the water runoff? What is the sunlight it gets? Right? What is the contours of it? And also a lot of regulatory things like what can I do? What's the river setback? What can I do with a piece of land? And then the blue, we already have an exclusive option to buy it that lasts for 1 year.
No, we do have 1 minute.
Okay, cool. This is the master plan. No, I'm pretty near the end, but this is the master plan of what's going to happen. This is a photo I took 2 months ago when I was there on the property. And yeah, so this is the model. It's entirely community funded, which I think is really important to show that you don't need to be a VC-backed company to do this. It was purchased using crypto, and actually investing in it produces a pathway to residency. If you invest $150,000 into a Costa Rican piece of real estate, you get a 2-year permit, and then once you've held it there for 2 years, you become eligible for permanent residency. There's a little bit more into it than that, but that's the rough contours. So in conclusion, I think pop-ups exhibit high potential as on-ramps or top-of-funnels for startup societies. They don't only to turn into land projects and become permanent, but some of them will, like Metacampus. And yeah, community funding is a viable mechanism that is already out there working. So if you're interested in pop-ups, I'm excited to say that we are launching a pop-up city directory, which is just basically a crowdsourced collection of all of the pop-up cities that I've heard of. And this is how to get more involved. So there's actually another Metacamp running in May. If you want to apply, just go to this website here, metacamp.community. They're also part of the Gitcoin Zuzlo event round. The pop-up directory is something that I'm doing at Bora.city, also in the Bitcoin Zuzlo tech round. And if you want to reach out to me about any of the things I discussed, about pop-up cities, where to find them, how to apply for them, so on, you can just telegram me tomorrow. I'm also going to be around. I'm telegramming over tomorrow's pitch. All right. Thanks, everyone.